Jugram Haschwalth first appears in chapter 485, standing alongside Yhwach as the Vandenreich declare war on the Soul Society. From that very first appearance, there's an immediate weight to his presence, as he has no need to raise his voice or flex his spiritual pressure. The other Sternritter fall in line around him because they know what he is. He's the Grandmaster, Yhwach's advisor and the substitute emperor of the Vandenreich when Yhwach is asleep. He is also the only Quincy in over 200 years to be born with the same soul distribution power as Yhwach himself. Yhwach refers to him as his other half. So despite Hashwalth having all of this acclaim within the story, the fandom has consistently underestimated him. Fans will debate whether if Gerard Valkyrie or Lil Barrow sit at the top of the Sternritter hierarchy, and Hashwalth just gets glossed over. His combat screen time is comparatively limited, and both of his major fights are against opponents where mitigating factors cloud the picture. But when you actually dig into the mechanics of his abilities, feats, and his narrative positioning, and the information buried within the Can't Fear on-world light novels, we find out that he's a character who is frankly one of the most dangerous in the entire series. In this video, I'll be analysing everything that we know about Hashwalth's combat abilities, breaking down his Schrift in detail, examining his version of the Almighty, and I'll be determining where he ranks amongst the other elite Sternritter of Yhwach's army. And honestly, he is a lot more powerful than Bleach fans give him credit for. Hashwalth was born fundamentally broken, where every other Quincy naturally absorbs reishi from their surroundings to form weapons and fuel their abilities. Hashwalth couldn't do any of it. He wasn't able to gather energy, thus was unable to form a holy bow, which meant that he was unable to even fire a holy arrow. As a young boy, he couldn't hit a stationary rabbit with a regular bow from a few yards away. Bazz-B, who befriended him as a child, theorized that Hashwalth was the rumored Quincy born once every few decades who was simply incomplete, a defective model. By all conventional Quincy standards, Hashwalth should have been weeded out as a failure. But as the story progresses, we learn that he wasn't incomplete at all. He was the opposite. Where normal Quincy take from the environment, Hashwalth could only give. His mere presence passively amplified the power of any Quincy around him, accelerating their development at an extraordinary rate. This is why Bazz-B's abilities grew so rapidly during the 5 years they trained together in order to kill Yhwach. Bazz-B believed his progress was the result of his own natural genius, but Yhwach revealed the truth. It was Hashwalth who had been fueling that growth the entire time. When Yhwach arrived to recruit for the Sternritter, he walked past every single Quincy present and chose Hashwalth, not Bazz-B, who was the obvious prodigy, and not any of the other warriors who had proven themselves. Why would he choose the boy who was unable to even properly form a spirit weapon? We begin to understand why Hashwalth is so special when Yhwach exerts his Reiatsu onto the surrounding. Every single Quincy present, including even Bazz-B, fall flat onto the ground, but Hashwalth was the only one who remained standing. Yhwach explained that Hashwalth was the first Quincy in 200 years to share his power of soul distribution, making him his other half. Hashwalth's inability to absorb reishi wasn't a disability or a weakness, it was a symptom of possessing the rarest ability in the entire Quincy bloodline. Hashwalth tried to refuse, as he told Yhwach that he'd made the wrong decision, as he pointed to his own lack of skill and argued that Bazz-B would serve far better as Yhwach's right hand. But Yhwach simply stated that this was exactly as he had foreseen. When Bazz-B fired a holy arrow at Yhwach in a rage, Hashwalth caught it with his bare hand. This moment marks the beginning of a 1,000-year transformation. Hashwalth spent those centuries at Yhwach's side, compensating for his Quincy limitations by relentlessly honing his swordsmanship. He recovered a broadsword from the ruins of Bazz-B's mansion and trained with it obsessively. 5 years of focused blade work as a teenager became a millennium of refinement as the Grandmaster. By adulthood, he had not only overcome his natural barrier to reishi absorption, he had learned to manipulate it as any Quincy would. And to top things off, he had also become one of the most lethal swordsmen in all of Bleach. Hashwalth's feats are scattered across the 1,000-year Blood War arc rather than being concentrated in one definitive battle. His debut combat feat comes during the first Quincy invasion, when he encounters members of the 13th Division led by the 6th seat Kajomaru. Hashwalth tells them that they're free to run, that such weak Shinigami aren't worth his time. When Kajomaru charges him anyway, Hashwalth vertically cuts the man in half in a single stroke without leaving him even a fraction of a second to react. Not too long after this, when a fatigued Ichigo carrying his Fullbring enhanced Bankai Tensa Zangetsu attempts to attack Yhwach as the Quincy forces retreat, Hashwalth steps in and cleanly snaps the blade of Tensa Zangetsu in a single swift motion. Even accounting for Ichigo's fatigue, this is a Bankai blade overflowing with Reiatsu, the same Zanpakuto that had defeated Ginjo, and Hashwalth cut through it like it was nothing. This was without him even activating his Schrift or any particular special technique. It was just his raw swordsmanship with a broadsword that he'd been refining for centuries, the blade which he has dubbed the Blade of Judgment. During the second Quincy invasion, Yhwach sends Hashwalth to confront the newly appointed Captain Commander Shunsui Kyoraku. Hashwalth introduces himself and calmly declares that the Vandenreich will exterminate the Shinigami forces. Shunsui, who is no fool, takes this seriously. He's genuinely concerned by Hashwalth's advance, and he concedes that the Grandmaster could kill him. Yhwach himself considered Hashwalth capable of handling the head captain, which says everything about the level of confidence that is placed in his combat ability. His fight against Bazz-B during the final stretch of the 1000-year Blood War arc is where we really get to see his raw physical dominance. Bazz-B's a Sternritter who kept pace with Hitsugaya and Rangiku, caught up to a fleeing Ichigo, and he wields burner finger techniques that can reduce entire environments to molten lava. So the fight between them kicks off with Bazz-B swinging at Hashwalth with burner finger 2, which Hashwalth simply dodges by leaping above him. When Hashwalth tries to move the fight outside to avoid damaging their castle, an irritated Bazz-B unleashes burner finger 3, turning their surroundings into a river of lava. When Bazz-B fires his holy arrow at Hashwalth, the Grandmaster catches it barehanded, and unlike their teenage years where the same action drew blood, this time he takes 0 damage. He slashes Bazz-B across the chest in a single swing, severing his right arm with another, and when Bazz-B desperately launches Burner Finger 4 followed by Burner Full Fingers, his most devastating technique, Hashwalth avoids it entirely before cutting him from shoulder to hip in a final stroke. Bazz-B threw every number technique in his arsenal, but none of it mattered. The speed differential was so severe that Bazz-B could only perceive Hashwalth's strikes after they had already made contact. Hashwalth was also deliberately holding back during this fight because he didn't want to damage Vaharvault any further. The anime expanded upon Hashwalth's combat abilities with an entirely new fight against Tenjiro Korinji, one of the members of the Zero Division. Hashwalth wielded his shield against Korinji's Shikai Kinpika, blocking multiple consecutive strikes from a Shumpo master. Korinji promised to crack the shield in two if Hashwalth didn't fight back. The Grandmaster questioned whether he could actually do so before intercepting the blade once more. Korinji eventually took advantage of having his blade embedded in the shield, changing his grip on Kinpika and ripping the shield from Hashwalth's grasp entirely. After drawing his broadsword again, Hashwalth attempted to cut Korinji down but was swiftly defeated. The fact that he had held his own against a member of the Zero Division even briefly is a statement of power in itself. His reflexes were sharp enough to intercept blade strikes from one of the fastest combatants in the Bleach universe. Later, Senjumaru activated a Bankai and sealed Hashwalth alongside the Schutzstaffel in a tapestry of flames. He remained trapped there until Uryu killed Senjumaru and her Bankai vanished, thus freeing Hashwalth and the other Schutzstaffel members. His intellect deserves to be mentioned too. During Yamamoto's battle with the imposter Yhwach, Hashwalth deduced that the flames covering Yamamoto's body when he uses Zankan Otachi's West technique were in fact concentrated Reiatsu and not real flames. He was standing in proximity to Yamamoto's Bankai heat during this period, which is itself a durability feat considering how the surrounding area was being incinerated. He also saw through Yhwach's scheme of naming Uryu as his successor, correctly identifying it as a deliberate provocation designed to force every Sternritter to keep their eyes on Uryu and strip him of any ability to act independently, and he identified the trap within Nanao Issei's barrier by recognizing that the obvious weakness in the hexagonal plate joints was too convenient to be genuine. His confrontation with Shunsui during the second invasion also showcased something really important about his growth. When Nanao erected her Hakuden Kepeki barrier, a Kido barrier spell designed to specifically shut out Quincy powers, Hashwalth gradually absorbed the reishi on his side of the wall until it became thin enough to bypass. For a Quincy who was born without the ability to absorb reishi, being able to quietly drain a barrier specifically designed to neutralize his kind of power is a statement in itself. He even complimented Nanao on the technique, noting that it took him longer than expected to neutralize it. Beyond his swordsmanship, Hashwalth can also fire blasts of energy from his broadsword, 4 pointed projectiles that curve back on each side, as he used these against Uryu during their battle, giving him a ranged option that most people forget that he has. Now we get to the real reason why Hashwalth is as dangerous as he is, and it's his Schrift designated with the letter B for the balance, and its Japanese name translates to world harmony. On the surface it sounds philosophical, but in practice it's one of the most broken abilities in the entire series. The balance allows Hashwalth to manipulate the fortune and misfortune that occurs within his sphere of influence. Any good fortune experienced by his opponent, including the fortune of successfully injuring him, gets converted into an equal magnitude of misfortune directed back at them. He doesn't need to physically retaliate. The ability functions as an automatic cosmic correction. If you're fortunate enough to land a hit on Hashwalth, that fortune becomes misfortune and the damage returns to you. The first time that we see this in action is during the execution of Kangdu and BG9. After their defeats at the hands of Hitsugaya and Soifon respectively, Yhwach orders their execution for losing. BG9 begs for mercy, pointing out that their Quincy holy forms resuscitated them and they can still fight. Yhwach tells them that they should be grateful for having survived at all. Hashwalth steps forward and delivers a sword slash intended to kill Kangdu, but he activates his Schrift, the iron, which hardens his skin and blocks the blade completely. Kangdu asks if Hashwalth forgot what his ability was, but Hashwalth simply notes that this is Kangdu's second showing of fortune, the first being surviving his fight with Hitsugaya. He asks him if he can see the scales tipping. In the next panel, his blade passes clean through Kangdu's body, bypassing his iron defense and killing him instantly. The balance had recorded Kangdu's accumulated fortune and converted it into misfortune, bypassing his supposedly impenetrable defense entirely. So this gives Hashwalth durability negation, which operates on a conceptual level. The balance appears to track fortune and misfortune passively, even outside of its active deployment. Kangdu's first fortune surviving against Hitsugaya happened well before Hashwalth activated anything. The blocking of Hashwalth's sword strike counted as a second fortune. The ability maintains a running ledger, so by the time Hashwalth tips the scales, he has ammunition that's been accumulating without his opponent even realizing. The anime expanded this further. When Yhwach left the Cage of Life to confront Ichigo, Uetsu Nimaya was spared from having to fight him, which constituted good fortune for Nimaya. Hashwalth converted that fortune into misfortune for the Cage of Life itself, causing the structure to splinter and shatter despite its durability. He weaponized someone else's luck against an entirely separate target. The reach of the balance extends far beyond direct combat. The balance alone would be dangerous enough, but Hashwalth pairs it with his spirit weapon, the shield, and the combination creates what is essentially a closed damage loop that his opponents cannot escape from. The shield, which translates to friend shield from German or substitute shield in Japanese, it doesn't function as a conventional physical defense. Instead, it absorbs all misfortune that would occur to Hashwalth personally, including injury sustained in battle. So when an opponent wounds him, the damage doesn't stick, it gets redirected into the shield. Now here's where it becomes genuinely absurd. Using the balance, Hashwalth can take the misfortune stored in the shield and redirect it back at his opponent as additional misfortune on top of the fortune to misfortune conversion that already punished them for landing the hit in the first place. His fight against Uryu demonstrated this at full capacity. When Uryu activates his Schrift, the antithesis, and reverses all the damage between them, Hashwalth is suddenly covered in wounds, while Uryu is completely healed. That should have been the end of it, but the balance immediately kicks in. Uryu experienced enormous enormous amounts of good fortune in being able to wound Hashwalth so severely through the antithesis, so that fortune is converted into misfortune of equal magnitude, and Uryu is thus injured again. Simultaneously, the injuries Hashwalth sustained are absorbed by the shield, thus healing him completely, and then that stored misfortune is also redirected back at Uryu. The result is Uryu taking roughly double the damage that he started with, and Hashwalth standing there completely fine. The only ways to beat this system are to kill Hashwalth in a single overwhelming strike before the balance can activate, or to strip him of his power entirely, which is exactly what the Ashvalan eventually does. You gotta be grateful that this happened, because if you're unlucky enough to face off against Hashwalth and anything goes in your favor, the balance will punish you for it. Hashwalth himself is immune to his own redistribution. He claims to represent balance in the world, but he has specifically exempted himself from the very principle that he imposes on everyone else. This now brings us to what happens when Yhwach falls asleep and returns to being the father of the Quincy. His powers end up being swapped with Hashwalth's. Hashwalth gains the Almighty, which is signified by his irises and pupils splitting into three and turning red. His eyes end up matching Yhwach's own. In return, Yhwach presumably gains the balance during this period, though we never see him using it, well, because he's asleep. Hashwalth's version of the Almighty grants him the ability to see into the future, and he uses this throughout the final act of the 1000-year Blood War arc. He sees Uryu scattering devices throughout Vahravelt. He knows that Ichigo and his friends will perish if they go to face Yhwach. He sends Yhwach a vision of Ichigo arriving and cutting him down, essentially acting as a remote early warning system for his sleeping emperor. He can also create streams of darkness while the Almighty is active, giving him an offensive capability tied specifically to this borrowed power, but his version is notably limited compared to Yhwach's the Almighty. Hashwalth can only perceive the future that is currently on track to unfold. He can't see every possible future branching outward like Yhwach can, and crucially, he cannot alter the future. During his confrontation with Uryu, he openly states that he is merely a vessel for the Almighty and that its usage pertaining to Yhwach is entirely different. He tells Uryu that what makes the Almighty truly terrifying isn't just the ability to see what's coming. He's foreshadowing Yhwach's power to reach into the future and change it directly, a capability he himself does not possess. Hashwalth himself describes the Almighty as a borrowed power. The raw Japanese makes clear that while he and Yhwach are of equal value, Hashwalth's development of the Almighty is immature. He can wield it but not to its full potential. This mirrors how his soul distribution power is itself a diluted version of Yhwach's, where Yhwach can both give and take power freely, Hashwalth can only give. When Hashwalth uses the Almighty at night, he loses access to the balance. This means he's effectively running a different loadout depending on the time of day. During the night, he's a precognitive fighter who can see your moves before you make them, but lacks his conceptual damage redistribution. During the day, he's the walking embodiment of karmic retribution, who can't see the future but can punish you for every stroke of fortune that you experience. Either version of Hashwalth is going to be a nightmare to face off against. Beyond his Schrift and the Almighty, Hashwalth also possesses unique utility abilities that further demonstrate his status within the Vandenreich hierarchy. He can summon a passageway to the Royal Realm using a technique called the Key, where he raises his sword above his head and causes a white Hagal rune to form on the ground. This creates a beam of light powerful enough to blow away surrounding combatants. This is how Yhwach, Hashwalth and Uryu ascended to the Soul King's palace. He can also generate shadow portals in the shape of a six-pointed cross, allowing Soldat forces to move between dimensions. These aren't combat abilities in the traditional sense, but they're exclusive to him and underscore the operational authority that he carries as the second in command of the entire Vandenreich military force. The question if Hashwalth is the strongest Sternritter is one that doesn't have a clean answer, and being honest about that is more useful than forcing a conclusion that the manga doesn't fully support. His feats and narrative position clearly place him above the rank and file Sternritter. He operates on a tier where only the Schutzstaffel are comparable. Gerard, who's the heart of the Soul King, functionally has infinite regeneration and grows stronger every time that he's damaged. Lil Barrow's Gabriel form renders him completely intangible. These are broken abilities on a cosmic scale, but the balance arguably hard counters both of them. Gerard's entire fighting style revolves around taking damage and using it to power up. If Gerard lands hits on Hashwalth, the balance punishes him. If Hashwalth sustains damage from Gerard, the shield absorbs it and returns it. The cycle that makes Gerard unstoppable becomes the very mechanism through which the balance would dismantle him. Lil Barrow's intangibility is harder to address, but the balance doesn't require physical contact to function. It operates on fortune and misfortune, which transcends conventional attack methods. Hashwalth himself states that his own abilities are better suited to combat than Yhwach's, and given that he chooses to engage Uryu with the balance rather than the Almighty, this seems to be genuinely true in practice. The Almighty is a more versatile and powerful ability overall, but the balance is a more immediately lethal combat tool. The real limitation on ranking Hashwalth is screen time. Both of his actual fights are a bit lackluster. Bazz-B posed no real challenge, the Uryu fight happened mostly off screen, so his fight from the anime exclusive scenes against Korinji comes the closest to measuring how strong Hashwalth is. But that was before the Ashvalan boost, and he notably didn't use the balance during that fight for reasons that the anime doesn't explain. Hopefully in Court 4 of the 1000-year Blood War arc we'll get a fully expanded Hashwalth vs Uryu fight. If you want a separate video of me covering how this fight between Hashwalth and Uryu could be expanded upon, then let me know by leaving a comment under the video. But following this, the Can't For Your Own World light novels adds a layer to Hashwalth that most fans overlook entirely. When Yhwach fell asleep for the last time and Hashwalth gained the Almighty, he saw something. He never told anyone exactly what it was, but his actions speak louder than anything he could have said. He ordered his most trusted aide to collect and treat the remaining soldat, along with Lil Toto, Giselle, Bambietta, and any surviving Sternritter. He gave this order while in possession of the Almighty, and he declared that the future he saw meant that the Quincy race had to be preserved no matter what. His aide later recounts to Lil Toto that Hashwalth's final words were simply, "No matter what happens, keep the Quincy's futures connected." He had in fact seen Yhwach's defeat. He saw his own death, and instead of trying to change either outcome, he used the time that he had left to ensure that the Quincy would survive beyond the war. He told his aide that the ability to see the future was unfair. He saw everything that was coming and chose to accept it. His aide also revealed something else. Before his final battle, Hashwalth had confided that Uryu Ishida was perhaps Yhwach's final trial for him. He said Uryu was the only person who could leave him shaken, and that if he was ever swayed by his emotions and forgot his role as balancer, then on that occasion he would need to return both his entrusted power and his life to Yhwach. He said this almost as if he had already seen that future play out. And when the Ashvalan struck him, Hashwalth didn't feel betrayed. He told Uryu that Yhwach choosing to take his power over Uryu's only proved that he alone was of use to Yhwach. In his dying moments, he asked Uryu to come back so he could transfer Uryu's wounds to himself using the balance one final time. He told Uryu to put everything on his scales, to weigh his decisions and consequences, because following others without truly weighing those choices leads to regret. So yeah, overall, Hashwalth occupies a position near the absolute peak of the Sternritter hierarchy, and he sits comfortably amongst the most dangerous characters in Bleach. What separates him from the rest isn't any single stat or feat, it's the sheer number of angles that he covers. Physical combat, conceptual hacks, precognition, passive power amplification, and a millennium of tactical experience serving directly under the most powerful being in Bleach. There's no clean weakness to exploit against Hashwalth during the day, and at night he trades his damage redistribution for the ability to see you coming before you even decide to move. The biggest frustration surrounding Hashwalth is that Kubo didn't give him enough screen time. But hopefully all of this is going to be corrected in the final core of the 1000-year Blood War arc anime. So we have now reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What are your thoughts on how powerful Hashwalth actually is? Do you believe that he could defeat the Schutzstaffel members in a straight fight? And are you hoping that core 4 of the anime gives him additional scenes that flesh out his combat capabilities further? Definitely continue the discussion in the comments, and if there's anything that I've forgotten to mention about Hashwalth, then do let me know. And lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around to until the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.